Now,
I think you
yes.
can hear me now.
Okay, okay. Okay,
Thank you
nice.
for this opportunity.
Thank you. And Dr. Anish is an associate professor and a registered mental health professional with 25 years of experience. He has served as head of the Department of Social Work at Rajagiri College and Marian College, Katikanam, chairman of the Board of Studies Social Work of Mahatma Gandhi University, Kannur University, and Rajagiri College of Social Science, a member of POS of Sri Sankaracharya University and 7 autonomous colleges. His areas of interest are intercultural competence, social work education, mental health intervention, migration, innovation in pedagogical approach in higher education. He's a research guide with Mahatma Gandhi University, and we are very happy, and it is an honor to have Dr. Anish as one of our speakers in this Congress. Thank you so much. Doctor, ahí está. Here we go.
Uh, can I start?
Yeah, sure, sure, sure.
Yeah. First of all, I should thank you for this opportunity to be with you. And this is my first exposure to Peru. And really happy to associate with you. And this probably will open our new avenues of collaboration.
Yeah,
Uh,
well, they people are seeing not only in Peru and in Latin America and in different countries.
yes, yes, yes. That's one. So this conference is a unique initiative where we have opportunity to listen to various speakers from various part of the world. And I could listen to some of the earlier speeches, which talks clearly about how the future of social work and social welfare and the well-being of people. So I was, whenever I thought about talking about future of social work or future of human welfare, we need to be more evidence-based because across the world, social work as a profession has gained its importance. But we always complain whether we have received the uh, adequate response for our profession. So I am very keen to talk about how we can create evidences in social work and also how we can integrate that to health and mental health. So I will be briefly talking about how we can integrate randomized control trials in mental health and health interventions so that we create evidences which are looked upon by people as something which is credible. So how we build credibility for our own profession. Let me share my screen and start the presentation. As I have no audience in front of me, I'm not going to ask you what will be our goal. But this will be the topic of presentation today. I'll speak about bringing evidence to practice, the role of RCTs in health and mental health social work, from my own experiences and also guiding my students in the field of RCTs. Now, in this session, I will be speaking about what is RCT and how we can design an RCT and what are the various methodological considerations we will be considering while designing an RCT, and also examples of some of the RCTs I have done and my students have done. Now, at the end of this session, these are the learning outcomes I envisage. We need to reflect on the concept, prospects, and challenges of the methodology of randomized controlled trials in social work practice. Demonstrate a basic idea of designing a randomized controlled trial, how we can do that, and also enlist the methodological consideration of RCTs. Let us deep dive into the topic of RCT today. Before I go into the topic, I thought how important is research in social work. This statement, the court says, if we are serious about developing social work as a profession and having practitioners able to practice safely and innovatively, then we need to both develop and use evidence to inform our practice. Evidences need to inform our practice. We are not just going to be common sense interventionists. We are also always concerned about the competency social workers need to develop. Within the competency framework of the Council for Social Work Education, we have always seen this very important competency frame, which talks about engage in practice informed research and research informed practice. So when we talk about engage in practice informed research, we have to evolve researchers from our own practices. And we also need to do practice based on research evidences so that our profession become a credible, trustworthy profession. So a lot of research or reviews of literature in social work has happened. It talks about the development of research resources in social work lag far behind the growth of the profession and has failed to meet this bit older, but still it is relevant. Meet the needs of practitioners who must work in increasingly specialized and complex areas of practice. Now the question is, why do we do research? We always have been talking about various dimensions of research. I have considered 5 E's for the research. The first one is about exploration. Now we know that there are so many phenomena which we have less understanding about. So those phenomena need to be explored further. So for that, we do exploration. We also need to elaborate what we already know. We have some understanding about some phenomena, some processes, some cultural changes. We have to elaborate that. And the third one is we also need to establish relationship between different variables or what causes what and how things are caused. That explanation needs to be done. So explanatory researches are being done. Now we also need to evaluate the outcomes of research, outcomes of interventions we have been doing, evaluation research. And also researchers are meant for creating evidences. So these are the 5 E's I consider when we talk about research. Now we are all familiar with various type of methodologies, the various designs. So we know that we have to focus on survey researchers, qualitative researchers, experimental researchers, and observational researchers. But we know that for social work, the future is experimental researchers and I would say qualitative researchers. We have done enough surveys. We've done enough descriptive studies. Observational studies, definitely we can do. Cohort studies, cross-sectional studies, and case control studies we need to do. But I have a specific interest in more focusing on qualitative as well as uh, experimental designs. In that, specifically on randomized control trials. Now, what are your thoughts about RCT? So, I would like to share a research story one of my students has gone through. I had a research scholar, a doctor student, who had come to me. She has been working in the field of health for a while, and she was concerned about people who are undergoing dialysis treatment, who are in the end stage renal disease. And she wanted to see how effective or is there a need for intervening psychosocially or a social work intervention in the context of end stage renal disease. Most often, the focus is on medical treatment of these people with renal disease, and we have given less importance to the interventions. And often, social work interventions are looked upon as relevant or less relevant or not at all required. So, my student wanted to show that it need to be done, and to show the people that this is possible, that we can enhance the quality of life of people who are undergoing treatment for renal diseases or they are in the terminal stages of their renal disease. So that was what she wanted to prove. In order to prove that, she actually wanted to understand what are the issues faced by children, these people. So the first step to start with this intervention was to understand what are the psychosocial needs of people who are undergoing end-stage renal disease. Next, she also wanted to understand what are the possible interventions available for those who are undergoing end-stage renal disease interventions. And also need to understand what do social workers think about those things and the primary stakeholders think about it. Focus group discussions were done with people who are undergoing dialysis treatment. Expert interviews were done. So based on that, these are some of the articles published out of those discussions for those studies. So basically, those articles all coming from something about a scoping review, talk about what are the interventions available for endocrine disease, some understanding about perceptions about experience of living with a chronic illness. All those things have been studied, and based on that, a theoretical model was developed. Based on the model, interventions was given, and when interventions were thought about, she started thinking, should I be doing a quasi-experimental design or a true experimental design? So in a quasi-experimental design, we know that the rigor is little less, or else we will not be able to clearly say whether our intervention has helped, or is the test effect helped, or is it because of some other interventions happened during the phase of the intervention. So coming to that context, we thought of having a control group to come in so that we will have a randomized control trial so that it becomes a true experiment so that the results can be explained to society as an important intervention. Now coming to the RCT is considered to be the gold standard in research. So we know that the study sample has to be put into the intervention group as well as to the control group, and the outcome need to be measured and the follow-up assessment need to be done. Based on that, we'll come to conclusions whether our intervention has been effective for the control group. But many often, when we have people who are willing to come for this intervention and we randomize them into intervention group or the control group. So sometimes some people, those who have been willing to take up this intervention, will not get the intervention because we have kept them into control group. In those contexts, we consider them as our waitlisted group rather than just a control, so that they will get the intervention. But after we complete the assessment of the pre and post assessment of the intervention group, so that we will be able to establish the relation between intervention, getting intervention or not getting intervention. Now, I was curious to know about how much RCTs have been done in social work, but this was only in the context of India. I just tried to understand randomized control trial. So I just went to the Scopus database and tried to search for literature on randomized control trial. You can see that, and social work. And the results ended up with, you can see, just 4 documents. That means there's not been a lot of research happened in the field of randomized control trial in social work. So that was something an eye opener for me that we should be doing more and more of randomized control trial. These are studies which have come up in those things. So some of those in the Scopus database. And this is a very specific database because I wanted to look at quality articles. That's why I looked into the Scopus database. Now the question is why we should be doing RCT in social work. So basically, we know that social work is a practice profession. So the practice evidence has been created. We also need to understand there is a need for a least bias oriented. Basically, RCT research generates the least possible bias estimates of effectiveness of social work interventions. And this can build credibility for our profession, as well as we can also practice based on research information, or research informed practice is very important. Now, when you look at the hierarchy of evidences for literature, we know that the lowest hierarchy starts from basic discussion or opinion of people with regard to some interventions. But the highest hierarchy is always an RCT and systematic review of RCTs or meta-analysis of RCTs. That's the highest evidences. So we want to do something of a higher evidence so that our interventions can be proved to be effective, so that our credibility of profession also increases, and we can also practice some evidence base. So now, how are we going to develop this intervention? So now the question of whether we need to do a quasi experimental or an RCT. Many often people doubt this basic idea that whether we will be able to do a full true experiment, rather they compromise to a quasi experimental designs. But there's a possibility that we can go for a uh, pure experimental design or a randomized control intervention. Now, for going into RCT, we have to first design the intervention, recruit and screen people, randomize the recruited people into control and experimental group. Intervention has to be given. We need to do the follow-up, and we need to do the analysis. Now, how do we design an intervention? That's a very key aspect of intervention because the rigor with which we develop the intervention is very, very important. Unless we have a research intervention developed properly, uh, we cannot claim the RCT to be effective. So designing is having clear importance. So we use the PICO formula for understanding how to design the research question, formulate the research question for the RCT interventions. I'll be going to the another aspect is that RCT need to be safe. The intervention need to be safe. What is that? It need to be sequenced. It need to be active, focused, and explicit. So that creates good intervention. Now, I have just tried to put up some literature together to understand how do we work with an RCT. So basically, how to design an intervention. So we have an initiation session part, then design of the intervention, then validation of the intervention, and finalize intervention. There are a few steps in each of these stages. The first thing is that we may start with a personal clinical intuition that I have been working with a type of clientele, like my student did on renal disease, or we have been working with a typical type of clientele, and we found that there is a need for creating evidence in this field. So your personal intuition can be leading for that. Or you have an expertise in a personal area of social work practice, you can do RCT for that, so that this can be established better. Then we also need to understand what are the evidence available for such interventions, or what are the gaps in such interventions. So those are the things we do in the beginning. Then you need to do an need assessment. So you need to talk to the real persons who are going to take up our RCT intervention, or the experts who are working in the field of that particular domain of expertise. And also we need to interact with the clients and allied people so that we understand clearly what is the need of intervention, or what are the areas to be addressed in this intervention. Once that initiation is done, then we design. So first you have to formulate the research question and the outcome measures. What are you going to focus on? Are you going to focus on quality of life? Are you going to focus on level of functioning? Are you going to focus on mental health? Or are you going to focus on well-being? So outcome measures have to be developed first. Once that is done, you need to develop an intervention model, or the theoretical framework on which you develop your intervention model, so that the model will be explained based on a existing literature as well as theoretical base. Then you need to design your mode of intervention, whether it is a simple intervention or a complex intervention. So simple interventions are something where you do a single intervention where you want to intervene with a particular dimension of the problem. But if you want to work on a holistic social work point of view, sometimes you may have to go beyond a single point of intervention. So then you have to develop interventions in a multi-level interventions. Then it will be called a complex intervention. We have to decide at this point of time. Once we develop the intervention module, because this module has to be, there should be a fidelity of the intervention. So to ensure that there should be a proper protocol, so that we follow the protocol across the same protocol with every client, so that the clients will be able to go through the same experience in every client, so that the outcome can be measured effectively. So once that is done, you need to develop the design. You have to get that vetted by experts, so that whether the particular intervention is going to be feasible, whether it's going to be valid. So we have to look at the validity and feasibility of this particular intervention. Then through expert vetting, we can do some pre-testing with some group of a clientele. Then we finalize a protocol. So once we finalize a protocol, we are able to work with the RCT intervention. So now intervention is scientifically developed through a process of exploration of understanding about various dimensions of the problem, various interventions already available in this particular field, so the gaps in the interventions which is already existing, and also based on expert and real stakeholder interactions. From there, we need to focus on what we need to focus. Are we focusing on efficacy, effectiveness, or are we going to look at theory and systems? So as we know that efficacy, look at to what extent does the intervention uh, develop the intended outcomes in experimental and ideal settings. To what extent this intervention produce the intended outcome in real world settings, that will be the effectiveness. So then we go into theory, because what works in which circumstance and how will explain the theory of aspect of it. And the systems will be how do the system and intervention adapt to the one another, whether we can adapt to this another context. Replicability is a question. So now once that is done, we need to have a ethical committee clearance, because it's a human subject we are working with. We have to get the ethical clearance. So that once we get the ethical clearance, we can go for trial registration. From an Indian context, we have the clinical trial registry of India. In that, um, we can actually register our study protocol, which again goes through a stringent way of assessment and evaluation by the experts. After that, they give the registration for you. Once the registration is there, if in Indian context we use the ICM or Indian Council of Medical Researchers Clinical Trial Registry of India, or you can use International Clinical Trial Registry of platform by the WHO. All can be used for registering the trial, because once we are doing a scientific process, it has to be properly documented. It has to be scientifically driven. So for that, trial registration is important. This is a site of the ICMR trial registry, and they will ask you these questions: what is the site of the study? Whether you have got ethical approval? What is the condition of the health condition or problem studied? Intervention module prepared, whether or not. What are the inclusion exclusion criteria? And what are the method of generating random sequence? Method of concealment, that how you blinding and masking the participant. All these dimensions, which are methodological relevant in the context of RCTs, this will be definitely asked in the context of registration. This is a example registration we obtained for one of our studies. So once that is done, we clearly understand who is the trial participant. So we clearly mention participant with that dash conditions of dash severity of dash and the healthy volunteers. A lot of we mention it clearly about who are the participants. Then we include the inclusion and exclusion criteria. So now the next stage is, once we have already done with the development of the intervention plan, we have registered intervention, then we have to go for the RCT procedures. So we have to recruit participants. Whom are you going to recruit? When are you going to recruit them? Where are you going to recruit them? For example, whatever study you are doing, it all depends on the clinical condition. If it's a health condition, we're looking at the health condition of the person. So where are you going to take them? What stage of the client we are going to take them for intervention? We have to be very clear about that in recruitment. Once that is clear, then you have the screening and eligibility assessment. So we have to set the criteria. What are the criteria for including this person to the RCT intervention? Then after that, you take the informed consent. Informed consent is clearly informed that, so that the clients are aware of the risk and the benefit of the intervention. Once that is clear, then we can go for the randomization. So this process will help us to understand how potential participants are identified, approached, screened, and recruited for the intervention. That's the stage. After that, we go for the randomization. So in a typical randomization process, we follow sequence generation, allocation concealment, and implementation of the randomization process. So in sequence generation, we generally focus on generating a random allocation sequence by some random procedures. Whether you will be using procedures like numbered identical bottles or sequential numbered sealed envelopes, different mechanism we use. So once that is done, the allocation need to be concealed. That means we, in social work interventions, we cannot blind the clients about the intervention they are going through. We cannot blind the person who's providing the intervention, because we need to know where you are going intervention, and the client also should know understand that they are going through interventions. So in those contexts, we cannot blind the process of intervention. Rather, we need to blind at least the randomization process, so that the person who is working with the client will not know who will be going through which group, so that it is done through a third party, through a randomization process, through allocation concealment. And in implementation, you enroll participant, assess their eligibility, discuss the trial, obtain this informed consent after giving clear information to the client, then enroll participant in the trial, and we also ascertain that intervention is being provided, and we intervene the administrative intervention. Now, before when we go into intervention, the sample size estimation is very, very important. So we cannot randomly choose some number. Random means the word meaning. We cannot randomly choose some number and say, okay, I'll take 10, I'll take 20. I cannot do that. We have to develop a sample size needs to be calculated based on available criteria to understand what are the type of interventions which is given in the current context of time, and what are the very different dimensions we have to look at. Basically, the power or the type of error you are going to look at. All those dimensions you have to keep in mind to develop your estimate your sample size. Sample size estimation is a very, very very scientific and very laborious process which need to be followed through in our interventions. Once that is done, we can blind the blinds. So we can actually think about blinding. So now in our context, single blind, double blind, or triple blind, especially in medical interventions, especially in the context of pharmaceutical researchers, they have possibility of blinding people. Triple blinding is possible. But in a social work interventions, we will not be able to blind the client, will not be able to blind the interventionist. So probably we have to blind the allocation process as well as the post assessment. The outcome measurement should not be done by the person who is providing intervention. So the person who is doing the assessment for the outcome measurement should not be aware of the group for which they are doing assessment, so that they do have no bias with regard to doing the outcome assessment. So we need to try doing that. So we need to also look at the applicability and possibility of blinding in social work interventions. As I already mentioned, in the allocation concealment, we can blind it so that we don't choose any client for our intervention. And we will also blind the outcome measurement so that we will not think of having a preferred outcome for the client, so that we are not, the person who is doing assessment is not aware whether the person is assessing the person is going in the control group or in the experiment. Now, once that is done, you to choose sampling framework. This is the Medical Research Council framework for developing the intervention model for framework, where you know that the core concepts and the feasibility, all these are dimensions we are good with. So once we have done the allocation and things are done, then we need to intervene. So we need to follow a protocol, intervention manual, so that we provide uniform intervention to every client. If it's an individual intervention or a group-based intervention, we have to provide uniform intervention to every client so that the credibility of intervention is there, fidelity of intervention is there. Then we also need to ensure fidelity. Fidelity means every client get the same intervention in the whole intervention process, where we can have fidelity checklist, or else we can reduce the number of people who are giving intervention, so that there is no individual personal variation in the intervention provided, so that we can reduce the number of people who are doing. Or else you can have a manual which will be clearly followed, and we have a fidelity checklist. We tick and see that every intervention is given for every client. But we also need to understand that when we do clinical interventions, we also need to be clear about the individualization of the clients. Then assessing the outcome. So how you assess the outcome? I already mentioned how can we reduce bias by blinding the person who is going to assess the outcome. Then we also need to draw statistical inferences, basically based on the interventions what you are doing. If you are having two groups, you can in simple terms, you have to ensure the cleanliness of the data. There you get clean data, normality need to be assured, outliers need to be managed, and also we need to run normality test and ensure that the data is normally distributed. Once the data is normally distributed, we can go for either independent sampleability test or a paired sampleability test. Again, depending on the for the within group assessment, we go for the paired sampleability test to understand whether there is a difference in the mean scores of the outcome variables before and after the intervention for the same group. But if you want to see the differences between two groups, basically the control group and experimental group at a baseline, at the outcome measurement level where the after the intervention, then we have to have use independent sample test to understand difference in the mean scores of the groups before and after intervention. And for a preferred result will be this, that in the before intervention at baseline, the groups will be having same result, so that there is no statistically significant difference between the mean scores of the outcome measures in before the intervention. But at the end of the intervention, we expect that control group will have lesser effect compared to that of the intervention group. Intervention group has a higher mean score. That will be the expectation. That need to be tested and understood by the independent sample test. But if we have multiple level assessment, for example, pre-assessment, post-assessment, and follow-up assessment, then we need to go for repeated measures and our assessment mechanism. Now the question is coming here, whether we have done a very solid intervention study and we did followed thorough procedures, but it will stay like a treasure without if it is not published. So we need to publish the results. We need to report the trial. How do you report? For reporting this guideline is very important. In order to report RCTs, we have to have consolidated standards for reporting a trial. That means the consult guidelines are there. Also consult checklist is available. Using that, we have to report the results. So for any article, you'll find in journals, good journals, you will, which is using RCTs, you will have this table like this, which is the consort guideline, which clearly depict how recruitment has happened, how randomization has happened, how many were there for the follow-up, how many lost to follow-up, and dropouts. All those can be identified through the looking at this table. This table is actually a very important source of information when you present the results of a uh, randomized control trial. This is the consort guidelines. This is a checklist. So when we write the article, we can always look at whether we are fulfilling all these aspects in the article. So the checklist has to be followed through very clearly. Now, some of the methodology considerations are basically into the validity, internal validity, as well as the external validity. So the external validity talks about how much generalization can be done for this particular intervention. That also depends on the rigor with which you did the research. Then internal validity is the extent to which results are true. That is, the results are not spurious. It is based on the intervention effect only. So now, when we talk about this, we have to look at these dimensions very carefully. The first and foremost thing is that the sample selection. The sample selection needs to be representative. It needs to be randomized so that there is a clear understanding that the people who are going to the groups will be clearly randomized. Then there should be a choice of a control condition. We have to understand what condition you are going to control the group. Sometimes there is a possibility that the groups who are going to the intervention group and control group may have possibility of contamination. So we have to understand what will be the control condition, clearly understand, then randomly assign them. Blinding is very important so that there is lesser bias in the intervention processes involved. Then we also need to plan the assessment and data collection. We have to ensure intervention integrity and intervention fidelity also need to be established as a methodological consideration. So we have different ways of reducing the bias in our methodology of RCT. So basically, one of the potential source of bias is selection bias is one of the major thing where the allocation to comparison groups can be biased. So for that, we use randomization, a procedure which allows every person whom we have selected in the initial level to be part of our intervention or control group without having any bias, without having any consideration by the person who is doing the intervention. Then we have the performance bias, where the care, the intervention has been given not equally same with the person. So for that, we can use single blind, double blind, where the subjects are assessed blind or both subjects are or assessors are blind. That way also we can do the blinding. Then we have the detection bias. The outcome assessment can be biased. For that, we also can use a triple blind analysis where the outcome assessors are also blind about the whole assessment procedure. Now, I want to share a few examples from my own experience of working in RCTs. The first one is with regard to one of the studies I've done long back in 2013, almost 11 years back, with the funding support from the University Grants Commission of India as a major project. So this was actually on a effectiveness of intervention model for enhancing social competence and well-being of adolescents. So in that, we did the school-based intervention. This was actually a cluster randomized control trial where we selected groups of students to be part of this intervention. In that process, we have actually done the initial literature search. We did focus group discussion with adolescents to understand what is meant by social competence for them. We also had expert consultations like professionals, mental health professionals like psychiatrists, psychiatric social workers, psychologists, and school counselors and teachers to understand what are their perspective about social competence of adolescents. And from there, we try to understand what are the components of social competence and try to validate that through a workshop with adolescents. From there, we develop the model. This model is actually having 5 components. These 5 components are part of the design of the intervention. This is the model on which we try to work on the clients. So we see that any person who has good self-esteem will have a goal orientation, a positive goal orientation. Once they have a good self-esteem and a goal orientation, they will strive to be successful in their life. When they strive to be successful in their life, they have to take appropriate decisions at appropriate times. For that decision making, they have to have rational thinking possibilities. Then, once they go through the process, they may have troubles in life. They have to manage those things and go forward. They need resilience. But all these dimensions, 4 dimensions, are all focusing on the person. But now they also need to be pro-social, so that their pro-social characters also will be helpful them to develop social competence. So once they possess all these 5 dimensions, then they'll develop social competence that will lead further to success and well-being. This is a model developed out of these possible experiences. So from there, we developed a 18-hour intervention. Then we consulted with experts and vetted by them. Then we did the intervention, pre-tested with 34 young adolescents in the government school in Kerala. Then the learning we developed and we tried to modify it. So we developed a 15-hour duration module. Then we took to reduce the bias or the fidelity, ensure the fidelity. We have tried to have only minimum number of interventionists. So I had to do that in a short period of time in 10 schools. So I had to take support of 3 persons. So those 3 persons were actually selected from a TOT program I did for a large number of people. From a training of trainer program, I identified these 3 people who have been similar in the way of their interaction, the quality of their intervention, something like that. So I identified them. Then we have included one school personnel, mostly a school counselor, to be part of this intervention. Then we also use the group randomized design. It's a cluster randomization of classes have been done. Then we have maintained a waitlist group. Then we use the RCP guidelines of consort, and the test was done. Intervention performed as planned in the intervention module. Fidelity check was performed, and performed post and follow-up assessment also. From there, we counted the study findings that at the intervention, you could see that this is the graph I've generated from the random repeated measures ANOVA test in the SPSS. That you can see that at the intervention, beginning of intervention, the outcome measure was self-esteem. So in the beginning, the control and experimental group was almost similar in their scores, and the control group or the waitlisted group maintained their score almost the same way, but the experimental group was able to improve their into higher score. But on a follow-up, you could see that there was a clear dropping of the score from a higher score to a lower score. Again, more or less similar to that of the control group in the follow-up period. Now coming to the second variable, again the same thing. Initial level they were matching. Then after intervention they have improved. But in follow-up also they were able to maintain to large extent. Resilience was maintained to large extent in the participants. Then the rational thinking part, they were again the same thing. They were able to increase, and there was a difference in the score even after the follow-up period. Goal orientation, again, same thing. The pro-social behavior also similar results have been found. But in the pro-social, you could see that in the waitlist group also there was an increase in the pro-social behaviors. So these are the 5 dimensions I studied in this particular study, and it has been proven to be effective. This was another study by one of my doctoral student. She has just completed her doctoral studies and just recently submitted her PhD thesis to the university. So this was actually about fertility quality of life of infertile couples. It was another social work intervention study which has used randomized control trial on a one-to-one client-based intervention, and it was proven to be effective. And now she recently submitted the results. So the process adopted for this particular study was all the things we discussed earlier. Problem was formulated, while a study was done, scoping literature review was done to understand the issues and interventions available, and tools for intervention also been studied. Then we identified a setting where this intervention can be done. We did the trial registration, and sorry, ethical committee clearance, then trial registered. No, so it goes like this: need assessment, then you consult experts, intervention module was developed, validated by experts, ethical committee clearance was done, trial was registered, then pre-test was done, then samples were identified, randomized to control experiment group, pre-test was done, intervention was given to the one group in the experiment group, post-test was done. So this was the process adopted by one of the other examples. And so, to conclude, when you talk about future directions, these days we are not going to be in silos. We are going to be in collaborative mode. So we need to think about collaborations in research. It is not just one person sitting in one place and doing that. Rather, there's a possibility of collaborating together to work on a research project so that it has better outcomes and better thought process happening in the process. Then interdisciplinarity is very, very important, because now we don't focus, social work does not focus only on social work. We are integration of technologies there. My recent study is on digital pathways to recovery for homeless mentally ill. Is actually integration of social work interventions along with the mental health interventions, along with the IT interventions. And AI also is being used. That study is still in the process. Then technology integration is very important. And we also need to focus on methodological advancement. Make use of the methodological advancement so that we do researches which are more scientifically oriented. Then the ethics is very, very important. So there is no compromise on ethics. Without compromising ethics, following the protocols of ethical philosophies, we have to follow two interventions. And ultimately, we have to end in disseminating our researches. Not that we should not be just publish, we have to publish. So these are some of the references I've used for this particular section. I'm closing here since it was a very monologous one-way communication. I was not, I just went on fast. Now, if you have anybody is online and who want to ask a question, you can ask that. Thank you so much. Over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Anish. Very specific with the subject, with the research. Really, congratulations for your work. Really appreciate that you are here in this Congress. Just with you, we finished this day on online session. I think Sakti, do you have some questions? I think. Sakti está. Tell me,
Yeah, good evening. This is Dr. Shakti Papa.
could you
So-
show up?
Yeah, it's very, can you see me?
Okay, yes.
So we are colleagues. So I just wanted to listen to Dr. Anish, and the presentation was very nice because I think the first time I'm listening on RCT, because no, a lot of researchers we listen more on qualitative, and so it was very interesting to listen to RCT in social work. So it was a very great presentation, Dr. Anish. And I just want to ask one question. What was the major challenges because when you did this kind of studies?
Yeah, see, one of the major issue when we do RCTs is the setting where you want to do the research. So it requires a lot of collaboration with other disciplines. So in all the medical health related researchers, it is very important to have the support of a medical team or the support of the medical treating team so that we'll be able to intervene psychosocially with the clients. So getting medical doctors with that type of attitude, an openness to explore the possibilities of psychosocial interventions to enhance well-being of our clients, which was one of the very important thing because two of my students now just completed their doctoral thesis with RCTs, and what we found was that they got really supportive medical personnel. That is one of the things which helped them to do the interventions effectively. This is one of the things because there is a lesser understanding of RCT in every context. And generally, what happens is it's mostly practiced in medical settings, especially in the pharmaceutical research and other things. So then there is people have less trust in the RCT, possibility of RCT in a medical social work intervention, which again we need to be convinced. That's why I am on a mission to prove that we are able to do social work intervention using RCT. So we that's why we particularly we wanted to register with the trial registry and do the procedures exactly as is done by medical in the research. So we've done that. So we have to tell the public loudly that we social workers are capable of doing this, and we are generating evidences from these particular interventions. So that is very important. That's why we are focusing. I wanted to focus on this. There are much other challenges. Again, the competency of students who are doing this is very important. And then when we are doing clinical intervention, they have to have competency in those clinical intervention. Those things are also there. But fortunately, I got a very good group of students who have been able to work with me in these processes, and they evolved in the process. And one good thing is that in the throughout the process, we always use the scientific approach, where I have shown the articles published by the students. Basically, when they wanted to do a scoping review of a particular issues, then that was made in an article and published. Or when we try to look at interventions, then we made into article and published. Likewise, it is actually and all in very good journals only we publish. That's why. So we are trying to generate evidence in that way. So my appeal is that social workers should take up more and more randomized control trials, especially those who are working in clinical settings. It is not just academic research, but practitioner-led researches are important. In practitioner-led researches, there's a high possibility of doing this type of interventions because they are in the setting itself. They can do such RCT interventions, but we need to develop a habit of integrating research into our practice, which need to be taken care of in the future.
Thank you, Dr. Anish. Thank you.
Well, Dr. Anish, glad to see you today and with you. We would like hear some words for you, no, like the ending words for our first day of our International Congress of Social Work.
Okay. So thank you so much for this experience, because I know that your conference is going really good with a lot of eminent resource persons in that in the list. So this was a real good opportunity for me to share my experience, and I am also doing certain workshops, especially with RCTs, because that is now taken as a mission that I will want to educate more and more people in social work to talk about RCTs. So this was an opportunity for me to go on an online platform and for an international audience. So thank you very much for this opportunity, and I hope that social workers will take forward this type of initiatives so that we will build credibility for our profession. I don't know about in the context in Peru, but in India we always complain that we don't get what we deserve. The
Well,
type of recognition.
in Lima, we don't have some. Well, we have courses about social projects. We do research, but specific like I am doing with your studies is a little different. Not yet. I think
Okay.
we are doing.
So anyway,
It's
thank you so
more
much for this wonderful
specific.
time. We will probably work together on something in future.
Sure. It's the first time that we are just here in an
Yeah,
event, but
Mr. Sibi
sure,
was
in the future we will continue
Mr. Sibi
coordinating
was
with
instrumental
more
in
team.
bringing this connection, so I thank him also this occasion.
Okay. Well, thank you, Dr. Anish, and thank you so much, everyone, for being here, for listening all the morning or afternoon or nights. It depends on the time that you are. Well, this session will is transmitting for our YouTube channel, and maybe many people will see or check it out later in the times where they are getting up also. But for now, we just finished with Dr. Anish here for today. Thank you so much, Dr. Anish, and thank you everyone for being here. See you tomorrow. Tomorrow we have all day long Spanish sessions. Okay. Bye. Bye everyone. Ciao. And subscribe.